Hello and good evening, my friends. This is Tiger. Welcome to my stream. Hey AJ, thank you for the good evening on the chat. I hope that Twitch is actually transferring us. I think it is. Looks good. So what are we going to do tonight? We will probably finish the cycle through the Austrian stuff before we might probably return to SimRail next week, because on 13th of December there is the big full release day of SimRail. So one more Austrian Train Sim World 5 Semmeringbahn. And Juniper, hello, nice to see you in the chat. I hope you are doing well. And one little thing, Taurus, long time no see live. Yeah, I read your comment this morning about this guy jumping in front of us, in front of the train at Mürzzuschlag. Ravenslofty, thank you so much for subscribing. Nice to see you on the chat as well. Currently on a 3-month streak. Bombastic. Thank you so much for the support. So, I prepared a little teaser about what are we going to do today. This signal, this red E on white ground, looks a bit like the end of a temporary speed restriction, but no, that would be a black E on white ground. So what is the red E on white ground for? If you look it up in the rules, it says Signal Fahrwegende, Ende des Einfahrgleises, at stations where this cannot be signaled with protection signals or intermediate signals or exit signals or whatever. So, and Ravenslofty said, of course I'll be around for the SimRail release stream. Yeah, that will be great. So I'm looking really forward for that. We will most probably get the Tutoir, the Polish version of the 52.8. What? Hype train incoming! That is bombastic. We'll have a limited time to earn exclusive remotes because Juniper has subscribed. Thank you so much for subscribing and getting our stream to level 1 hype train. No, not yet, but 62% it says we are there. Big enough, thank you guys. So this is what I was in the process of announcing that we will be talking about today. This red E on this signal under the orange W, the Warte signal that we know from German signaling as well, but this red E, it is quite unique as far as I can see for Austrian signaling, and it takes a bit of a story to understand what it is good for. Juniper says, well-deserved little reward for all the amazing teachings and all the time it must take to make this beautiful presentations. Thank you so much. This is so great that my stuff actually is found useful by you guys, and it is really beautiful that with this channel I can communicate with you guys and discuss all those interesting matters of running trains all over the world. Like the second thing that I wanted to talk about today is you might remember our video about Gleiswechselbetrieb in Germany running on the how to say that, on the left track, on the wrong track, and you might remember that we have signals like this, those thingies, the 6 signals, sometimes illuminated, sometimes like a sign as here at Mammendorf from the München-Augsburg DLC. And you might remember that in Germany, if we want to send our train into the track for the opposite direction, the left one in German typically, then we need a sign like this typically. Sometimes it can be substituted by other things, but usually we need an assignment, and an assignment transferred by a signal. You might remember that in Polish signaling we have a not unlike signal of a Zakaschnik, what is it, 24 maybe, or 25, something like this. And yeah, I would like to show you the equivalent in the Austrian system, but we will see there is none. And so we will discuss how Gleiswechselbetrieb is done in Austria. Those are the two things, and for that I have gotten the idea by playing a service that was actually sent into the Gegengleis without any signal. And I tried to find out whether this makes sense and whether this is legit, and apparently it is. Semmeringbahn. Tarvisio Bosco Verde to Bretslav Part 2, 1114 should be the one. And thank you so much, AJ, for donating the 100 bits and progressing our hype train with it. 1114, that is the one, I guess. We'll have... I want to have snow. Light snow in December. So, two things. Wrong track movement in Austria and this funny little signal with the red E here in the game in connection with the waiting signal. That is a signal that is only valid for shunting services. Okay, we have an intermodal train. It is quite lightweight, this train, below the 800 tons, obviously, so we can run our locomotives in P. And we don't need to have a long loco formation, obviously. We can even run the locomotives in P. Sitting here at the red signal. We need some lights. R is not allowed because we are NP-Zug, a freight train. More colloquially, SIFA, PCB, LCB, in case we should encounter any. Then AFB on. It's a bit premature. Let's wake up the train first before we do stuff like this, and then we can set the AFB on. Shuntings. Oops. Sometimes the controls are still confusing me. 25 for shunting speed, then we can release the brakes already. Aha. And we already have a signal that allows us to proceed a bit. For a second I thought we are set to PZBM, but that was not the PZB, but it was the air conditioning, maybe. So, anything that we forgot? We are held by the AFB holding brake. We're getting this interesting signal on a protection signal without the white bar in the middle. No, this is the old version without the white bar, and this signal allows train services and shunting services alike to pass this protection signal here. Juniper says the Austrian Störung gets me every time. Alright. Well, then let's announce ourselves at the dispatcher, and he says proceed as signals indicate, and now we can actually go even according to what the mission is telling us. Since we have not gotten a proper signal, not a green one, we would have to approach the next signal at least with not more than 40. Since I'm not sure whether we are a shunting service or a train service, probably we are a train service, but we can see that the signal at the end of our track is red anyway, so there's no point in speeding. Ravenslofty says you are set to PZBM though, right? There's a 70, yes. And I think I will just leave that. I did not do the calculation whether we can maybe run the service as a PZBO, even though we are even though we are a freight service, if we can get more than the 110 Bremshundertstel. I'll just leave it with the PCPM. And stop at the train, at the signal. You can see it's a signal. If we get a double green, that usually limits us to 60, we are getting upgraded to 90. With this Geschwindigkeitsanzeiger, you can see that this is the starter signal, the exit signal, or Ausfahrsignal, AS. That means that this limit will expire as soon as we are out of the switches with our whole train. But at the moment, this is all not relevant because the signal is showing a red and it is holding us there. And if we try to investigate why it is holding us there, for some reason, even with the Austrian signaling, the game calls the aspect in HP0, what would be the red light in German. Why they call it in Austrian signaling HP0 is not entirely clear for me. In Austrian rules it is called Halt, simply, not HP0. And from what you can see, our service will go across this switch here and run in the track for the opposite direction on the left side. This is why we can't go there, because there's a train actually coming in. Even though there is a signal that is giving us a green and is called Verschub. Now it is red. Was the signal for that train probably. And then we are supposed to actually go quite a bit on the left side. Now we can hear the train passing. Until then, here we have to go back to the regular track on the right before we pass this station. What is it? I forgot where we started. Gloggnitz. Yeah. Hey, CD Radar. Hi from Railjet 370. You are on the Railjet 370 at the moment. That's beautiful. Yeah, and now we keep our eyes peeled what signal we are getting when we are sent into the track for the opposite direction. And we will see that there is no signal. And the funny thing, and we will see this in the presentation soon after, is that I always thought Austria has right track rule, but the truth is actually that in Austria you can have both. So it needs to be set out for every track that is a at least double track, whether the regular track is on the right or the regular track is on the left. What seems to date back to times when railroading started, during the times of the Austrian-Hungarian double monarchy with Kaiser Franz and Sissi and those guys. And CD Reyes says, I'm on my way home from Wien. That's nice. Oh, home, I invented. I'm on my way from Wien. Don't know whether you're going home or anywhere else. And this this empire, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, was more or less a hodgepodge of different regions that used different rules for their railways. So they had some tracks where trains used to run on the right side, and other tracks where trains used to run on the left side. And that is still a thing in modern days Austria. And most of the time, from what I can see, trains are running on the right side, but there are still some parts where trains are running on the left tracks regularly. What loses more and more of its significance. Because from what you can read, by now most of the tracks in Austria, if not all of them, are actually fitted in a way that the dispatchers can send the trains on the left track or the right track more or less at will. And what makes most sense to get most traffic through their tracks. What is, if you compare this with the super complicated rules in Germany for using the left track, seems to be really smooth and easy to do. Yes, Holmes, says CD Redauer. Then I just got this right by chance. Yeah. The Austrian-Hungarian Empire, including biggest part of the Czech Republic, for example, Slovakia, Slovenia, Hungary, obviously. The nowadays Austria, parts of northern Italy, even some parts of Poland and the Ukraine. Lived from, if I'm not mistaken, something like 1867 up until the end of World War I. And is, from what I understand, still quite important, those historic relations between the countries Austria, Slovenia, the Czech Republic, Slovakia. Croatia, even some parts of Serbia. Juniper, in my country trains drive on the right, but there is a high-speed line across the border to Belgium where they drive on the left, but some intercity services are also use this line, and so they have to switch to left side driving and then back. Feels strange. Yes, you're talking about the Netherlands, right? I read this. Luxembourg has the same problem, more or less. They are driving on the right side, but trains going to Belgium have to switch to the left, because in Belgium they stick to the left, just as most of the trains in France do. In my understanding, in some parts close to the border of Germany, trains in France run on the right side even. Theodoro says, but isn't the track right? The right track is clear at the moment. I guess it is, to be honest. I have no idea why they are sending us on the left track here. Whether this is actually intentional or not, I don't know. Maybe they are sending us on the left so that we can be overtaken by a faster train on the right track. Since we are a freight train, I think it is our destiny to be kept waiting. Even though I have heard that, at least in Germany, you can pay extra fees to the to the infrastructure provider, even as a freight train, and if you pay those extra fees, then the dispatchers have to dispatch you with priority, even in front of ICEs. Those trains then even appear in a different color on the dispatching screens, so that dispatchers know that those trains need to be put through first and foremost. I'm really looking forward to the first Dutch route in this game, so that I can dig into Dutch signaling rules. And the automatische treinbeïnvloeding, if it is still used at that time then, and not everything is switched to ETCS. But we will see. I don't think that so fast that everything will be switched to ETCS. The old stuff prevails. So now we've got a double green that is typically limiting us to 80, to 60, but since we have this additional sign, it is actually a limit to 90. Oh, maybe I should release the brakes before starting the train. Yes, the Netherlands is Juniper. So we have to adhere to the 40 anyway, because that is still from the starting program. The starting program runs out, we are allowed to go 90. So if this is actually fully intentional that we are going in the left track here, so now the starting program ran off, so we can accelerate to the 90. And whoops, we're going in the left track. So those switches must be really fast, because they allowed us to go there with 90 using the Roadrunner. Limit should be 150, so way beyond our freight train speed limit. And Juniper's, yeah, trains driving Rotterdam Breda can use part of the Rotterdam Antwerp HSL, but they need to be equipped with ETCS. But yeah, RTB is here to stay, I think. Currently zero investment happening into rail infrastructure. Ravensloft, my point isn't. Ah yeah, they are discussing it. Yes, this is good that ATB stays around. Like a friend of mine from Belgium said the other day, krakende wagens rijden het langst. So that is true for the ATB trains. Meep meep. So, as you can see, we are running on the left track with the normal speed limit towards Potschach. And we have signals on the left, just as we have signals on the right. So it wasn't a problem at all. We didn't get a special signal. We were just routed there. In real life, I think dispatcher should have told us that we are going there, or we should have seen that from our timetable if that was already a thing at the time. So any kind of information should have gotten to the driver, so that the driver knows that the train is actually going the way that it is supposed to go. Nomad Soul, hi all. He says thank you for first appearing on the chat, Nomad Soul. And CD Ray says his train is so full, he's stuck at the restaurant carriage. So, limit to 60 announced.
Zugbeeinflussung.
Since it is PZBM, we have to drop to 65. And you will see that for whatever reason the AFB setting is following the 65. It's a snowy ride on the left track. And did we get the announced 60 here because we are going back on the right side? Not so super clear. The thing is, we got the distance signal that announced the reduction to 60. It can, and this is I think okay, also announce a higher speed limit, just as we get it here. Double green with a white 10. So it was only a reduction to 100. They could have given us a yellow 10 to announce for that. Was so necessary. Sorry for that. I still am not totally rid of my cold. And now you see we are limited to 100 when going across the switch. If that is actually intentional, it feels a bit fast running the switch when 100 with our freight train. But that is what they signal us. And again, without any special signal, we are back in the regular track. Why we actually went into the left track here, I don't know what the idea was. I did not realize that any train was overtaking us or something else. Juniper says, when I bought Semmeringbahn route, I found it interesting that you can see the entrances to the in-construction Semmering tunnel. On Spessartbahn I couldn't find the entrances even though the tunnel is complete. I did not even look for that, but it's a good idea to look at that. And see the radar sus, and the connection is so poor on our tracks. Well, so now we are on our regular track again, and I think this is time to cut in the first presentation of the day. Where are we? Austrian presentation, that is good. So maybe I should switch to Leseansicht first, so then nothing is spoiled. So first a little thing about the running order. And Theodore says probably scheduled man at work operation on the right track, but the team is on strike. Yeah, maybe it was too cold for them, so they stayed at home. The running order, Fahrordnung, typically this tells you whether you are supposed to go on the right or on the left, and most operating rules have a section that tell you that trains are supposed to go on the right, and in exceptional cases they can go on the left, or vice versa. In Austria it is actually quite interesting because they have a lot of stuff in this piece of regulatory law, the Eisenbahnbau- und Betriebsverordnung, and what I always read as Eisbären, polar bears, Bau- und Betriebsverordnung. And they have two things, the Gleiswechselbetrieb, we will get to this soon, but the other one that you can have, the other mode of operation in your railway, will be the Richtungsbetrieb, direction operation, if you translate it word by word. That would look like this. You have more than one track, at least two tracks, or a pair of tracks typically, and we discussed this already. If you have a Fahrordnung, that orders you to go on the right, so for this piece of track, the running order tells you that trains are going typically on the right, then you would have signals only on this track. And this is then called the correct track, richtiges Gleis, whereas the other track is called the wrong track, and there are no signals for this direction. Obviously for the opposite direction there are signals, but in this direction there are no signals. And without signals it is always hard to drive. And if you look into the RSSB rulebook for UK train operations, for example, then you find a lot of rules for running on the wrong track movement. So it is the same idea, falsches Gleis, wrong track movement, and because you don't have any signals, because the level crossings are not prepared for trains coming in the wrong direction, you have typically go very slowly on side, hoot a lot and honk a lot, and it is quite bothersome to do this. So since in Austria there can be running orders that order you to run on the right and on the left, the whole thing can look differently. So you can have pieces of track where everything is inversed, where you have the correct track on the left and the signals here, and the wrong track on the right side. But this is more or less historical, but from what you can read, this is not used anymore. It's still in the law, obviously, but it is not a thing. Because meanwhile, most of the tracks, or even all of the tracks on main railways in Austria, use this mode of operation, the Gleiswechselbetrieb, track swap operation. You might remember that in Germany we have this word Gleiswechselbetrieb as well. But in Germany everything is much more complicated, because there are, especially if you look at it historically, there have been so many different forms of operation to use the opposite track with borrowed signals, with signals without signals, and so on. So everyone who thinks that Germans sometimes tend to overcomplicate things, and if you compare the Gleiswechselbetrieb in Germany with the Gleiswechselbetrieb in Austria, then the one in Austria is definitely a more clear-cut thing. Lofty contributes and says, I've actually been on a train which had to do wrong track movement because the line was flooded and the train was cancelled, so it needed to reverse back to the station. Yeah, and I think, or I expect, this was a very slow movement then, and a quite cumbersome one. There are actually on the West Coast main line, I think, a scenario where you have to reverse, but they expect you to reverse quite fast and not doing all the stuff that you need to do, especially if your locomotive is on the wrong end, or you're sitting at the wrong end of the train. Sometimes you need to stop in front of every level crossing and get out and check that it is secured, and that takes a lot of time, and Ravensloft is extremely cumbersome. Must have been like 20 miles, yeah, because you have to go on site all the time, right? And especially if you're sitting on the wrong end of your train. Then you must have someone at the tip of the train that can radio you or blow a whistle or a horn and initiate the brakes maybe. Yeah, very cumbersome. Much easier if you actually have on your 2 tracks signals on both of them, so that you can actually switch between them more or less at will, and you have signals to get your trains through. And then it is not called the wrong track and the correct track anymore, but you have names for it like Regelgleis and Gegengleis, what would translate to the regular track and the opposite track. And this is the thing that is done on, from what I understand, all railway lines in Austria. And if you have the Fahrordnung inversed, then it looks like this. Then it is the regular track on the left side and the opposite track on the right. And there is one provision in the operating rules, more or less, for this, for Gleiswechselbetrieb, the term Richtungsbetrieb. You can't actually find it anymore in this Betriebsvorschrift V3, what is the central document for the operating rules in Austria. So everything is done with Gleiswechselbetrieb, and more or less everything that is necessary is that both dispatches for the 2 directions, right, the one who is sending trains up the line and the one who is sending trains down the line, have to agree that a train goes in the opposite track, and then the switches need to be set, and the paths need to be secured, obviously, and they need to mark it that the train is going on this track and tell the driver, and then everything is okay, and you don't need any signal for that. And Juniper says there is IC-Lokführer on YouTube who recently uploaded video on driving backwards from Hamburg Alton, a dead-end station, to the yard. There is someone at the back of the train who radios the signals to the train driver. Yeah, that is always an interesting thing to do, and I'd really appreciate if in the game we can have something like this. On the Glossop line we had a scenario the other week, it's been a couple of weeks, where they actually took it upon themselves to put a generated character and an NPC in the cab on the other end that radioed us in this scenario, but most of the time we are just expected to reverse from the opposite end without looking, and that is obviously a thing that you wouldn't do in real life, but of course that is crazily dangerous if you can't see where the end of your train that is a couple of 100 meters away, where it is going and what the signals are. Yeah, this stuff that we need in Germany, like the Gegengleisanzeige Z6 that signals the driver that we are going into the opposite track, and in Poland we find something similar, the Wskaźnik. Yeah, jetzt kann ich nicht, I can't say 24 in Polish, but it's the Wskaźnik 24. So you can see the similarities between German and Polish rules. In Austria we don't need that. We don't need anything like this. There is no visible signal in the landscape. Sometimes you might have markings on your timetable if it is regularly so. 24, yes, CD Radar can say that is great. It is something like Bote, but not sure, probably. But no, I can't say that. Yeah, that's it already. So opposite track movement in Austria is, from what it seems, really simple, because you don't need a lot of complicated rules, and you do not even need a signal. Even if the signals are not properly working, you can use the opposite track if the dispatches agree and can reach an agreement. So it is not surprising that we did not get any signal here when the game sent us into the opposite track. And now comes the part where we run along the line towards Wiener Neustadt. And well, comparing the tunnel entrances being here and not in Main-Spessart-Bahn, I think we have to make amends and acknowledge that this is a rather modern DLC, and Main-Spessart-Bahn is one that is from the era before Train Symbol 2, I think. Maybe it gets a facelift or a remaster, what they call it sometimes. Fortunately, the preservation crew does not live anymore. So we will see. Or maybe sometime they will. I really like Main-Spessart, but it is so shaky. The rails, yeah, that is also a thing. On Main-Spessart you can actually have a lot of weird routes where it is unclear whether you need a Gegengleisanzeiger or not, because the station boundaries are not so super easy to see. And since, according to German rules, within station boundaries there is no opposite direction track, but all tracks are more or less treated evenly. When you are sent into the quotation marks opposite track in a station, then you don't need all those rules that you would have to follow for opposite direction track movement on the open track. And CD Radar says poor railroads driving cars will be unable to run in the Czech Republic from January, since they do not have ETCS, so I guess locals will be pulling them ahead. They will probably do sandwiching. They did this with regional express trains here in Germany a lot until recently, with Dosto cars with a Vectron on either side, because the driving trailer on the Dosto trains did not have ETCS, according to my knowledge. So maybe they get a Taurus on both ends, or a different locomotive that works. Whoosh. That was a quite harsh change of weather. And Juniper asks, do the new ones with Vectron face on the driving cars have it? I think so, but I actually can't. So I was a bit late with opening my main circuit breaker because I was reading the chat, but at least now I know what happens and I can close it again. And after that you could see Dosto trains with Vectron and driving trailer, but still a lot of them running around with Vectrons on either end. Comfort jet they are called, with the Vectron faces. Interesting. There are so many jets now. The night jet, the rail jet, the comfort jet. And Juniper says, I saw OBB Taurus pull a new rail jet with the Vectron face. Will they keep using Taurus, or is the idea to make a rail jet of Vectron? Interesting questions. Let's see if CD Radar knows the answer. Lofty says, I know the Vectrons are objectively better locomotives, but I think the Taurus looks nicer, yes. I can feel you on that, but well, it is just a generation thing, right? I don't know nothing, he says. Interjet, radio jet, he says. Now the question about whether the comfort jet trains are supposed to get a Vectron on the other end, or whether they are still supposed to run with a Taurus. So a Vectron to go with the Vectron face on the driving trailer. I think that was the idea. While we are already on our last leg towards Wiener Neustadt, and Juniper says he will research. Nice sparkling Ravensloft wants a drive-by. Didn't it say we have an intermodal train in the description? Does it really look like an intermodal train? This empty car. Trailers. Fahrwegen. I guess we can let the train coast. Soon enough we will be running into a signal announcing a limit to 40, because 40 is the limit for the diverging track into the freight yard. I think the 1216 can do multiple system as well. Yeah, definitely. It's the more versatile locomotive. More modular. Here is the announcement of the 40. Below the 65 for the PCBM. And then pay attention to the signaling sequence, because then we will be getting one signal before the diverging track to the freight yard. Not that one yet. And CD Radar says the 1216 is currently pushing me. Here's our 40 signal. And what I want to direct your attention to is that we just passed this board here. the limit of shunt board. Halt für Verschubfahrten. That signal that I'm always go on everybody's nerves that they use the Austrian version with Verschubfahrten also in Germany. Why is that important? We will see that in the presentation, because in Austria those signs are treated sometimes as station limits. In some contexts that are also relevant for that signal that we are looking at today. So because what is happening now? We are going on a single track, and now we have a lot of switches, and the track is panning out in multiple tracks where trains can be stabled. The game wants us to proceed 1.8 kilometers to Wiener Neustadt, track 627. And if you think that at the end of those tracks there are signals, be it regular signals, be it protection signals, be it little dwarf signals or whatsoever, that control which of the many trains that can sit in this yard is actually allowed to proceed, then you are mistaken, because there are no signals at the end of those tracks. Well, that's not quite true. There are signals, but not light signals, and not signals that have any relevance for trains, because as we can see, we are approaching only a Wartesignal, a waiting signal, those orange W signs. We are a train, not a shunting service, so we could usually ignore those orange W's. But why am I stopping here now? In my opinion, this red E here should actually require us to stop, so that we can then announce ourselves to the yard master, transition into a shunting service. As a shunting service we would have to wait at this signal, and then the yard master can actually tell us who of us is allowed, which of those trains here is allowed to proceed through this bottleneck and go to this part of the station. Because obviously here at this bottleneck you need some sort of ruling to get all those trains through. Whether this can be done while the train is running, I'm not quite sure, but at any rate we need a signal here, and you can see a signal here that stops us. It tells us this is a VO5, that signal. Here the signal apparently should be an HP0 showing red. Even though the signals are totally the same if you look at them. There is not a red light, there is only the red E and the orange W. So how does this make sense? Or how does this probably maybe make sense? I tried to get to the bottom of this by reading the rules a bit and analyzing it, and I stumbled across a concept that I have not stumbled across before in German rules or any other rules. It is the concept of the end of the running distance, the Fahrweg. Fahrweg is a thing that plays a role in many rules, also in the German ones. But the Fahrwegende as a special thing that can be signaled in a station is, as I can see it, more or less unique to Austrian rules. So there are rules about the end of the running distance. And we will see that this is important because the train cannot run faster than the end of its running, not further than the end of its running distance. Then it would enter the safety or protective distance, and that would be problematic because Fahrwege are not allowed to overlap, and they are not even allowed to touch if there is a protective distance in between. So what can we find in the rules? The first thing that the rules say something about is an incoming and stopping train. Incoming, einfahrender Zug, always relating to a station. So the traditional idea is a train is running from one station to the other and is stopping there. Not talking about like these H signs exactly where the train is supposed to stop, but what is the running distance that need to be reserved for this incoming and stopping train to make railroading safe? How long does this actually go? And here the rules say something interesting. They say that the running distance for an incoming and stopping train at a station starts at this limit of shunt sign, the Verschubhalttafel, the one that I just pointed out when we were running into the station here. This is the one for the opposite direction, obviously. So this is the one that this train that is coming here sees from the back side, whereas this is the one for the leaving trains that tells here stop, shunting services can't go. So those Verschubhaltetafeln limit the station in a way that it limits the part of the tracks that can be used for shunting operations. So if a train, and you see I tried actually to make a red railjet train here, is coming into the station, is supposed to stop here, then the running distance at the station that needs to be reserved for this train starts at the limit of shunt board and it ends at a spot that is defined as the end of the Einfahrgleis, the end of the incoming track. And that only puts the question further. So where does the Einfahrgleis, the incoming track, end? At a signal, at a switch, at a certain spot where the train is supposed to stop at the platform? That is actually defined in a different rule that we will have a look at in a second. But the first thing that we have to acknowledge is that the running distance for an incoming and stopping train ends at the end of his incoming track on the Einfahrgleis. And after that, in most of the cases, you have something that we have already seen called as the Durchrutschweg in German rules, or as an overlap in Anglo-Saxon rules. So typically there is a distance that is put at the end of the running distance of this train that is also reserved for this train in case that the train fails to stop at the end of its running distance. Sonderzug. Well, I come back to this later, CD radar. But the protective distance, safety system distance is maybe a better word, but it's Schutzweg. It's called in Austrian law and rules. And typically you must have one. In certain situations you don't need one if there are other safety measures that can make sure that this that there is not a problem, not a danger, then you can leave it away, the Schutzweg. But typically this is that part of the track that needs to be reserved for that incoming and stopping train, and no other trains are allowed to go into that running distance. And this train is not allowed to go into the protective distance. This is quite clearly stated in this provision of the rules. They say the protective distance may not be used, so the train must stop before entering the safety distance, protective distance, den Schutzweg. So that is the first takeaway that we have from this, that there is an inherent end of the distance that an incoming train can use that is supposed to stop at this station. And this is not necessarily a red signal. It can be a red signal, but not necessarily so. What we will see. And now a new feature in my presentations before going on with different kinds of trains. I will go to the next slide and discuss what the end of the incoming track, das Ende des Einfahrgleises, is. So, Fahrweg and Signal Fahrwegende. Ende des Einfahrgleises, end of incoming track. That is defined as jeweils das erste erreichte Signal of a certain catalog. So the first signal that is mentioned in the catalog in this rule is or marks the end of the incoming track. So the train has to stop at that signal. And the first variation of the signals that count against this total is actually quite surprising, because it says if there is no other signal that is reached before that, then the exit signal is the end of the incoming track, regardless of its aspect. So the Ausfahrsignal, AS signal, marks the end of the incoming track, even if it is green or showing a proceed aspect with a limited speed that is allowed. So that means that the train that is supposed to stop at that station has to stop at any rate at least before passing the exit signal, even if it is green. So even if we are a service that has to stop before or whatever, in our here at the exit signal ends our incoming track. Then there are two things that are more intuitive actually, is that we are passing a Zwischensignal, an intermediate signal, ZS marked, that shows red. Then this marks the end of our incoming track. That is quite clear. If we are coming into the station and there is a red signal, then we have to stop and can't go on, whether we have reached our destination, our platform, or not. So obviously here ends our incoming track, end of our Einfahrgleis. Same thing works with a red protection signal. Then it does not show Halt, it shows Fahrverbot. In the game it would be both HP0 obviously. Then our incoming track ends, even if we have not reached our platform where we can actually have the passengers board or not the position where we have to stable our freight train or whatever. So this is where our incoming track ends and we cannot proceed. Obviously this changes if the signal gets switched, then we get a new Fahrweg and a new end of our Fahrweg, but allocated. But for the process of coming into the station, this is where our Einfahrgleis ends. And then there are some things that are obvious, more or less. Also the signal at the end of the track, typically at a buffer block, marks the end of the incoming track if you are routed into a dead end track. That is not so super surprising. It is never a good idea to pass the end of the track, especially if there is a buffer block. So stopping in front of that, it is advisable in most of the cases. And what signal then actually is fixed to the buffer block or the end of the track is not stated exactly. They call it a Sperrsignal. That would typically translate into this signal, Weiterfahrt verboten, but in the game at least, and I think in the Reality 2 you can find also signals of that kind, what looks like a German SH0 or the Wertehaltetafel in German. In Austria it has a different name. I think I forgot, like something that no train can pass this point here. So those and no shunting service either. So those 3 signals can be found at the end of a track, and they would mark the end of the incoming track. And Theodoro says the signal is called common sense. Yes, well, even if for some reason the signal is missing at this point, it is not advisable to pass the buffer block at the end of the track, even though, like in Luzern, you get an authority by ETCS to pass the buffer block at the end of the track with 40. This is the kind of authority that you might not want to make use of by using your common sense. In some exceptional situations, the end of the incoming track can be given to the driver with a written order. That can be a typical order, or it can be stated in a law. What is interesting, that also in Austria you have laws. So that is the collection of all the temporary speed restrictions. Typically, we've talked about this when we discussed the EBU law. That actually does not include the law, and law stuff is given to the drivers, according to my knowledge, typically on their tablets, so that they can see this and know where they have to slow down because of temporary speed restrictions. So in those documents, the driver can also be told where the incoming track ends. And then, but this is only on very small railways. I think if you have a station without signals, especially without a home signal, then the end of the incoming track can be at the tip of a switch or this Grenzmarken thingy, the foul marker, that typically shows up to what point the train or a vehicle can be stabled without fouling the track next to it. But those are special situations. And now, one thing I left out. What do I have to do if I don't have a signal at this point where I want my trains to stop? Like in our situations where we were running our freight trains into the Wiener Neustadt freight yard, and we have this fanned out number of tracks, and the trains are coming in, and we have a station master, and the station master or Weichenwärter has to more or less sort those trains out and has to tell what train has to go to from the incoming yard to the outgoing yard, or vice versa. And for that, it is advisable so that the trains actually stop. They arrive there and they await orders, and then the yard master can figure it out and tell train number so and so, now you proceed through the bottleneck and go to this and that track on the other side of the bottleneck as a shunting service then, and no longer a train service. But for that, we need the trains to stop, and we were sent in with this signal that looked like this one here, that allowed us 40. And now how to mark our incoming track. Our orange W does not really work for that, because we are still a train service, and as we know, those signals are only relevant for shunting services. So as a train we can just run it, we don't need to wait in front of it, and it cannot mark the incoming track for trains then. So this is why we have a special signal for it, the signal Fahrwegende, end of incoming track signal. And this can be used in situations where you do not have a signal of the other kind to mark the end of the incoming track, and this is that. And since the train is not allowed to go into the Schutzweg, but has to stop before the end of the Einfahrgleis, here is my reasoning, and everyone correct me please on this. It should be a thing to stop in front of the signal, transition from the train service into a shunting service maybe, and as a shunting service we have to wait at the Pokemon signal, the orange W, and await orders of the yardmaster that allows us to pass it or not. And then this orange W takes over, and as a shunting service, after we have stopped and ended being a train, we can be organized by the yardmaster. So this is how it makes sense for me. If this is actually true, I don't know. Correct me if I did not get it wrong, or if you know anything more that is to be said. But at this, in this interpretation, it makes actually sense that this E is in red. Red, like always, stop. And don't pass it, just thinking like, well, no idea what this E here has to say or wants to tell us. This is then actually a stopping board, like you have in British rules and signaling. You have those white boards with the red dot on it in yards sometimes, and with additional instructions telling you to call signal or whatever, or hoot or wait 5 minutes and then go on, or whatever. So boards like this that enable the yard masters to sort out the trains in the yard, and I think this is very important in this situation here as well, because otherwise every incoming train runs through the first fan and through the bottleneck, and the fan on this side of the bottleneck does not really make a lot of sense, because I have no chance to stop the trains before going into the bottleneck, and then I don't really need this fan. Yeah, this is my interpretation why we have the signal here and what the signal can be used for. And now we can go back to this one and have a look at the rest of this rules for the running distance of a train service that comes into a station. If it is not an incoming or stopping train, we can have an advancing train. So what is an advancing train? We often have the situation that station areas are subdivided by protection signals. Protection signals in this case are used in Austrian signaling in situations where there is not enough room between main signals to provide enough braking distance, and then you can have protection signals. In German rules you typically have those dwarf signals that are protection signals as well that can allow progression or not. In German rules you would not get a red one on a dwarf signal without warning, but here you can be sent up to a red protection signal with the double yellow, for example, and need to be slowed down before that, obviously, because you don't have your full stopping or braking distance. It can also be, if you have enough room for a full braking distance, an intermediate signal, because it is a main signal at the station. That is a full-blown one. So it is a Zwischen- or Schutzsignal, intermediate or protection signal, and the train can be stopped there before getting into the position where it can load or allow the passengers to debark. So that would be, for example, for the incoming and stopping train, would this protection signal or intermediate signal, as we have seen, mark the end of the incoming track. And then the train is no longer an incoming and stopping train, but it is an advancing train as soon as the protection signal switches to an aspect that allows the train to proceed. That would typically be the two white lights on top of each other in a vertical fashion, or the intermediate signal would switch to a green aspect or a proceed aspect at any rate, and then this advancing train advances, and then the running distance for this train starts at the end of this train, and this is marked with the end of train signal, typically the two red lights or those white and red boards that you can sometimes find on freight trains and that are missing on a couple of trains that we have here in the game. And since the train obviously has traveled this distance already, have at least to reserve the distance that the train is already occupying. So this is where it starts. And then it ends again at the Ende des Einfahrgleises, what would be the next signal in this progression, according to the rules that we just have looked at. So the next red signal, at latest then the exit signal, or our red E as a marker, or, well, the signal at the buffer block. So an advancing train has this. And after that, there would be another protective distance, so the train cannot go faster. So you can see that a train that is coming in can actually have a progression of different ends of the incoming track according to what signal it encounters. Whereas an outgoing train, a train that is leaving the station again, has a running distance that starts again with its end of train signal, what is obvious because the distance that the train is already occupying obviously needs to be counted into its running distance that is reserved for this train, and then it ends at the limit of shunt board, the outgoing limit of shunt board, and then so that the running distance for the train is on the open track again, and we don't need those special rules in 108 of the ISBBV to discuss where the end of the incoming track is. So here in these situations we don't need it. And then only in the operating rules, not in the law, we have a provision for passing trains, trains that are not stopping, not stopping trains, or that are actually covering more of those distances between several possible signals that can end the incoming track. And then we have to add it up. We have to just put it together. So let's say in this situation here, if this signal is not at red but allowing to pass, then we obviously have a different end of the Einfahrgleis. So passing train that is just running through the station has obviously the whole distance between the limit of shunt boards that is reserved for him. Since it does not stop, there does not need to be a Schutzweg after that. For now, at least. And here, that would be an example for a train that is coming in and passing several sections that are subdivided by protection or intermediate signal until it actually stops in front of the Ausfahrsignal here. Then we have to add them up together, and that would be the running distance for the train services here. So why did I do this all together? To explain why we need to have this red E on the white board here, and this can only be more or less grasped if one gets into this concept of Einfahrgleis, incoming track, that implicates that the train cannot go further than the end of its incoming track and then transition into a shunting service. What I don't know, what I have not been able to find out, if there is any situation where the train can transition into a shunting service without stopping. I doubt it. In German rules, it is only possible in a very limited exceptional scenario where you can transition without stopping at an HP0 with an SH1. And if your train number is written into the Streckenbuch, usually you have to stop. And I would assume that we have to stop at this red E, transition into a shunting service, and then we have to wait for the yardmaster to allow us to proceed. The game does not do it game has no problem with us passing this signal, because from what we cannot see, this is set with the internal coding V05, whereas those signals are set to HP0. They look the same. Why our signal is now allowing us to pass and not the others, we cannot see that. Obviously we now have to talk to the yardmaster, no longer to the dispatcher that is controlling the traffic on the line. And I guess now we transitioned into a shunting service. We got the permission from the dispatcher telling us proceed as signals indicate. That means we are allowed to pass this orange W, and this is what we do. CD Radar says, yay, made it to Praha and now I'm sitting in Arriva Schnellzug. Oh yeah, that's great that you're progressing. So as always, what I told you about this stuff here is what I think I can read out of the rules and how I understand it. I am not a railroader, I am not an expert, especially not on Austrian rules, so if anyone knows more about this, knows how it is done in real life, knows what I got wrong, please always feel free to correct me. Is it protected by magnet? That is a good question. I don't think they can be protected by a magnet. And I can't see a magnet here, not only because there is no, those signals are not protected by magnets. Now that we transitioned into a shunting service, even though we are still shown a limit of 40, we are limited to 25 as a shunting service. And that even the game understands that we are a shunting service. You can see from this here that it is giving us, well, it is calling us a SH1 out of that was not VO5, but the aspect name was, it was something else. We will see what it actually meant when I rewatched the video. It is giving us a shunting allowed signal here. It is not an SH1. SH1 is obviously a German coding, whereas those other dwarf signals here tell us shunting not allowed, but we know that in Austria those shunting not allowed signals are irrelevant for train services. So as a train service we could go just across those horizontal white lights, and the fact that the game actually opens the signal for us in the 45 degrees way means that we are now a shunting service, because as a train service, on the other hand, it would have been totally irrelevant. Here you can see those signals from the opposite side, so trains coming from this end would obviously also have to wait in front of the bottleneck. And if from both ends the train can run into this yard without having to stop at these E-boards, then this would be actually a call for mayhem. While going out of this yard here on the other side, we have proper signals again.
tiefer.
So, hopefully I will not spat here. And this is the end of the service, so the game wants the service to proceed through the bottleneck at the end as a shunting service without having to stop in front of the e-board. So, if it was my game and my call, I should just tell the team that they should factor in the possibility that those e-boards are actually red signals, just as they did it in most of the modern UK routes, where those stopping boards with the red dot are actually treated as red signals that can only be passed if you ask for permission first. And I think this would be the thing to do for those e-boards as well. Guys, rather a short stream today, but you might have realized from the interruptions in my audio is that I am still bothered by my cold and I have to cough and sneeze, and so I think it is okay to call it a day. Juniper says, thank you so much for the stream, thank you so much for the attendance and for your contribution and your support. I hope that next week we will be back for SimRail release. The 13th should be the Friday, right? So maybe I can actually be back on Friday then, because on Sunday I actually am busy otherwise. So yeah, let me know whether what we talked about today was in any way relevant for you, or at least interesting. It's always a good thing for me to see signals that I have not seen before in the DLCs, and this always calls for investigation. Yeah, and those are the things that drive me to dig into stuff. And again, if you know better, let me know. I'm always happy to learn. Raven's Lofty says Friday 13th release. What could go wrong? Totally. What could go wrong? Or at least then we know why things went wrong. We will see. I'm totally looking forward to new content on the SimRail front. And hopefully then at the Christmas sale I can pick up some more DLCs for Train Sim World 5 and be back with more streams about UK and American rules, because it was a bit much on Austrian and German rules. But this is because it is sometimes so hard to find topics in American routes what you can really talk about. Anyway, sorry for blabbing. Thank you for your support, your ongoing support, and have a nice time in December 2024. See you around. Take care.